Russia isn't learning its lesson. Once again, Putin has ordered his troops to march into Sloviansk. That settlement is a hellscape. A death zone. It's where Russian soldiers go to die, as their leader orders them to smash their bodies against a town that never sleeps. And it happened again. Ukraine set the trap. Russia thought it broke through the Sloviansk front line, only for that trap to spring shut. Ukraine broke every Russian soldier that was ordered to charge straight into hell. Russia's Sloviansk disaster started with yet another push. From August 1st through to August 2nd, Russia launched a string of offensive operations in the Sloviansk direction, relying heavily on advances it had made previously to form a sort of salient in the Sloviansk direction. The assault doesn't seem to have been on the town itself. Combat maps demonstrate that this offensive likely took place about 15 kilometers outside of Sloviansk. However, that distance is important. It means that Russia has placed Sloviansk in artillery range, and it also means that Russia can use its FPV drones to assault the town and attempt to create a kill zone of its own just outside of the settlement's borders. So the Russian strategy was simple: build on the salient that it had already created and attempt to advance under the cover of its own FPV drones. That salient, which is a word used to describe any military position that projects into the territory of the opposition, was the key to the Russian assault. Established in the region of Kalenyky, it pushes into the grey zone around Sloviansk, in which both Russian infiltration units and Ukrainian units have established positions. Nobody truly occupies the grey zones. Stretching for several kilometers, these zones are where much of the fighting takes place, only it's not the kind of fighting that you would expect. There are no big frontline pushes or large-scale mechanized assaults taking place. What tends to happen is that Russian units infiltrate and Ukrainian units conduct search and destroy missions. Drones are everywhere. And it's into one of these grey zones that Russia had established the salient in the Sloviansk direction. On one hand, this salient was a good thing for Russia. It represented a break in the front lines that Russia could exploit. Running along a road, it allowed them to advance up and down a forested strip of land outside Sloviansk, offering good cover. That aids logistics. It means that Russia can move soldiers and supplies closer to the front before both have to enter the grey zones to attempt assaults on Sloviansk. From the salient, Russian infiltrators can sort of diffuse out into the grey zone territory, where they attempt to establish bulkheads into which other troops follow, thus widening the salient to punch a larger hole through the front lines. That's what Russia was attempting near Sloviansk. Only there's the whole "on the other hand" aspect that was at play. The salient was important, sure, but it also meant that Russia only controlled a 2-kilometer wide area, through which all soldiers and resupply efforts had to pass. That area was within range of Ukraine's drones and artillery. Plus, the salient comes with other issues. Russia's forces had pushed through the front, but that also means that Russia's moving through the salient are surrounded on 3 sides. All that Ukraine has to do to track Russia's movements through this salient is deploy some of its legions of reconnaissance drones. Cover could help Putin's soldiers, but not for long. The eyes in the skies were always watching, and they registered Russia attempting to prepare an assault on Sloviansk via this salient. Ukraine continued to watch. It waited for the perfect opportunity. Then Ukraine struck. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, delivers the details that we have. Ukraine launched a brutal counterattack in the Sloviansk area, likely focused on the salient and the Russian forces trying to push on from the battlefield bulge. That counterattack took place near Rai-Oleksandrivka, and it's been confirmed to have taken place by Russian military bloggers, the ISW reports. The result was the complete shattering of the Sloviansk offensive that Russian troops were preparing. By the end of Ukraine's counterattack, Russia was pushed back from the grey zone, making absolutely no advances while likely losing some of its infiltration units. The salient effort was blunted, and Russia was devastated. That salient effort was actually one of the more impressive examples of a Russian advance that we've seen in the last couple of years. Impressive is a relative term here. Still, Russia's forces had managed to push forward about 6 kilometers towards Sloviansk in around 2 weeks, which is a pace of advance that far outstrips anything else that has been happening on the front lines in recent months. It's not huge, none of Russia's current advances are, but it was enough to create the potential for an assault, and Russia tried to fulfill that potential. Ukraine stopped Putin's soldiers in their tracks, lured them into a trap of their own making before striking against the salient. Russia once again failed to learn the Sloviansk lesson. This settlement, along with everything that surrounds it, is an absolute hellscape for Russia's forces. Still, they attempt to push forward. Putin demands it. But not even Russia's desperate attempts to use glide bombs to change the Sloviansk situation are working the way the Kremlin expected. Sloviansk has been a target for a long time. As far back as March 30th, the New Voice of Ukraine was reporting that Russia's grand spring offensive, which was supposed to set the stage for the collapse of Donetsk later in 2026, had stalled out just outside of Sloviansk. Russia has been trying to advance from the east, only to run into the brick wall of a vast Ukrainian kill zone, loaded with trenches, barbed wire, and a seemingly endless supply of drones. The situation had left Russia with only one option to conduct an assault on the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk urban area. What was meant to be an assault from all sides on that region had devolved into Russia simply throwing cannon fodder from its 3rd Combined Arms Army into the kill zones. There was no supporting action from the flanks. There still isn't, as we see from the salient that was surrounded on all sides by Ukraine. Analysts at the time said that Russia's decision to attempt to advance without this supporting action on the flanks would lead to extremely high losses in return for minimal gains. Those analysts were right on the money. By July 1st, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, had gathered enough data to highlight just how pitiful Russia's rate of advance with this strategy had been. The outlet noted that the period between December 2025 and June 2026 has seen Russian forces advance just 15 kilometers in the Sloviansk direction, achieving a daily rate of advance of about 90 meters per day. You don't need to be Usain Bolt to cover that distance in about 10 or 15 seconds if you're running, but Russia took an entire day to move forward by that amount for over 6 consecutive months. And even then, Russia's forces still remained about 20 kilometers east of Sloviansk itself. Based on that rate of advance, it would take Russia another 222 days just to get to the outskirts of the city. In other words, it won't be until the beginning of 2027 that Russia will be in a position to actually attempt a true assault. And every time we see something like what just happened in early August, Russia's forces get set back. Military analyst Clement Molan summed up the situation outside Sloviansk and across much of the front well in a July 31st post on X, where he said that the fields of eastern Ukraine are starting to look like a chessboard. Trenches are everywhere, along with other fortifications that have essentially divided the territory outside of Sloviansk into separate squares that Ukraine has transformed into drone-infested kill zones. In 2026 alone, Ukraine has dug more than 3,800 kilometers of these trenches, and it's likely digging more. Every trench is in place to stop Russia from advancing using tanks and armored vehicles. Soldiers have to infiltrate on foot, and they need to navigate these trenches to get to where they've been ordered to go. What Ukraine has created is a chessboard of defenses. Each square is loaded with drones that strike any Russian soldiers they see. We assume there will also be other defenses, such as artillery that strikes once Russian soldiers have been funneled into position by the trenches, along with search and destroy squads that are constantly on the hunt. This is the situation that Ukraine has created outside of Sloviansk. Trap after trap after trap, and all Russia's forces can do is bungle from one to the next. With the failure of the most recent attempts to advance under its belt, Russia is being forced to rely on a tried-and-true strategy to try and create more favorable conditions. Glide bombs are being launched en masse. That's according to the ISW, which reports on comments from the Sloviansk military administration head Vadim Lyak, who says that Russia carried out a Fab 250 glide bomb strike against Sloviansk on the morning of August 2nd, likely to support the attempted assault that Ukraine's counterattack shut down. This isn't a new strategy for Russia. The use of glide bombs also isn't just about attempting to shape the battlefield. Russia wants to cause as much chaos as it can with these weapons, and it's happy to kill civilians in order to do it. Just a week or so before Russia's assault failed, RBC Ukraine reported that Russia unleashed a trio of glide bomb strikes against Sloviansk in 24 hours by July 24th, injuring 16 people in the process. A child was among those injured. And that's the point for Putin and his army. If they can't advance on the ground, they will terrorize from the skies. Frankly, this seems to be the only truly effective strategy that Russia has left. But glide bombs didn't help Russia's ground forces on August 1st and 2nd. Ukraine dispatched those forces, blunting the salient and sending Russia back to the drawing board. It's clear at this point that any assault on Sloviansk means death for Russia's troops. So the question has to be asked, why does Putin keep ordering these assaults? There is a good answer to that question that we'll reveal in a moment. But before we do, this is a reminder that you're watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to hit the button and enable notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. Sloviansk is important for a simple reason. It's part of the Donetsk Fortress Belt that Russia needs to destroy if it's to capture Donetsk and, by extension, the wider Donbass region that Putin has wanted ever since he launched his campaign of aggression in 2014. This belt is a concentration of 4 cities that run in a 50-kilometer line along the H20 highway in Donetsk. Before Putin launched his invasion, these 4 cities had a combined population of 380,000 people, with Sloviansk being the larger of the 4, with a pre-war population of 105,000, the ISW reports. Ukraine has spent well over a decade fortifying all 4 of these cities, ever since Putin launched his campaign of aggression in 2014. Each is laden with defenses to the point where taking the Fortress Belt will be much harder than any other strategic gain that Russia has made since its initial advance in February and March 2022. Combined, the Fortress Belt region is over 7 times larger than Pokrovsk, which Russia took well over a year to capture, and about 4 times larger than Bakhmut, the battle for which was among the bloodiest that we've yet seen during the war. Beyond that, Sloviansk serves both symbolic and strategic purposes for Russia. It was in this city that Putin was able to establish his first pro-Russian bridgehead in 2014, DW reports. Local separatists were even able to briefly take control of Sloviansk with the help of Russian intelligence back in 2014. For Putin, that makes Sloviansk the proof of his constant claims that Russians and Ukrainians are one people and that Ukraine wants to become part of Russia, with only the regime in Kyiv holding it back. To take Sloviansk would mean completing the work that Russia started more than a decade ago. In the wider context of the war that has raged for 4.5 years, which itself disproves all of Putin's symbolic claims, Sloviansk also offers access to the M03 highway. That highway links Kyiv to Kharkiv and then onto Donetsk and ultimately into the Russian region of Rostov-on-Don. If Russia is able to gain control over this highway, it can cut off Ukraine's access to the northwest of the country, leaving Sloviansk isolated and preventing Ukraine from using that highway to shuttle in troops and supplies to Donetsk. Ukraine would also struggle to rotate soldiers out of Donetsk, allowing Russia to batter away its increasingly exhausted defensive forces. With all of this in mind, it makes sense that Russia continues to launch assaults in the direction of Sloviansk, even with all of the deaths and the repeatedly being caught in traps when it believes it's broken through the front lines. The Russian plan is simple. First, it takes Lyman, which the Russian news agency TASS claimed was captured at the end of July. From Lyman, Russia pushes into and through Sloviansk, which in turn gives Russia the ability to launch assaults against Kramatorsk. Russia claims it has completed step 1 of this strategy. However, an August 4th report in Euromaidan press suggests otherwise. As is so often the case when Russia claims to have captured a settlement, what really seems to be happening is that infiltration units have penetrated, but full control is far from established. Russia is still far from established in Lyman, claims the spokesman of Ukraine's joint forces, Viktor Trehubov. And until Russia is established, any attempt to assault Sloviansk will end the same way as the attack on August 1st and 2nd, because Russia doesn't have the launch pad it needs for successful assaults against the Fortress Belt city. So that's Russia's Sloviansk situation right now. It will continue to launch assaults, but it's still a very long way away from even being close to reaching the city's borders, never mind capturing it. We could look at this as a microcosm of what's happening in Donetsk as a whole. After all, the situation is the same. Russia pushes but doesn't get all that far. Russia's plan is to occupy all of Donetsk by the end of 2026. That plan lies in tatters because its advances are so ludicrously slow that it will be lucky to have even reached the edge of Sloviansk by the end of the year, never mind capturing the rest of the Fortress Belt cities that need to fall. We touched on how trudging the Russian advance toward that city has already been. In Donetsk, and Ukraine as a whole, the situation looks even worse. In its August 1st assessment of the Russian campaign during July, the ISW noted that Russia has managed to advance a whopping 37.8 square kilometers in Ukraine, achieving an average of 1.22 square kilometers per day. For context, that's an area smaller than Manhattan, the think tank points out. There was some good news for Russia in that July was the 2nd month in a row that Putin's forces managed to achieve a net territorial gain in Ukraine. June offered a similar yet smaller advance of 30.02 square kilometers, while April and May combined to see Russia lose almost 400 square kilometers of territory. So Russia is still trying to catch up to the losses it experienced earlier in 2026. So far, it's about halfway to covering its April losses. That isn't a good look for the nation that is supposed to be on the offense and raging through Donetsk. The pathetic rate of advance is cast under an even harsher spotlight when you take Russia's July losses into account. On August 3rd, the Kyiv Independent reported that those losses amounted to 42,860 soldiers killed or wounded, which is a high watermark and then some for 2026. The previous high came in June when Russia lost 39,290 of its soldiers. What this means is that Russia sacrificed over 1,130 of its soldiers for every square kilometer it occupied during the month. The Fortress Belt is clearly doing its job. And as we saw on August 1st and 2nd, Sloviansk's defenders are brutally effective. As for Donetsk as a whole, capturing the region by the end of 2026 is an impossible goal. The only way that could happen is if all of Ukraine's defenders simultaneously decided to simply stop fighting. And given the incompetence of Russia's soldiers, we're not even confident that laying down arms would be enough for Russia to take the Fortress Belt by the end of the year. Insults aside, the rate of advance that we've seen in June and July is so slow that open-source intelligence analyst Deep State says that Russia won't even be able to capture Donetsk in 2027, never mind 2026. The only thing that seems to be capable of changing this dreadful forecast for Russia is if Putin follows through on the rumors that he is preparing to mobilize 500,000 Russian soldiers following the September State Duma elections. That's the sorry position that Russia's leader now finds himself in. He can't take Donetsk when he said that he would, and the only way he could make that impossible plausible was to be doing the one thing that he has repeatedly promised that he wouldn't do. None of this helps the soldiers that Russia just sacrificed near Sloviansk. They were ordered to charge into hell, and hell is exactly what they found. However, Ukraine's Sloviansk counterattack offers just the smallest hint at what's really happening to Russia's Donbas front line. That line is on the verge of collapse, as Russia loses up to 2 battalions every day to Putin's obtuse obsession. The Russian army is failing to capture Donetsk. You can find out just how bad that failure is if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show, where we analyze the reality of what's happening in the Ukraine war every single day. And thank you for watching.